Okay, here's a thought to kick us off. What if everything you thought you knew about your consciousness, your mind, even death itself, what if it was fundamentally mistaken? Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a theory that's, well, it's not just groundbreaking, it's deeply controversial. It really challenges our basic understanding of existence. Our mission for this deep dive is to really explore two radically different perspectives on consciousness. So on one side, you've got the conventional materialist understanding rooted firmly in the brain. Your brain makes your mind. Simple, right? But on the other side, there's this revolutionary noetic perspective. And it proposes your consciousness isn't even in your head at all.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate anymore, stuck in universities. It's a discussion that's increasingly backed up, or at least explored, by scientific inquiry. You see echoes in ancient traditions, too, and as our sources suggest, it even connects to some really cutting-edge and sometimes quite clandestine technology. We're going to try and unpack some, well, surprising facts and maybe some aha moments that could genuinely reshape how you think about reality, about life, and the big unknown, death.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're pulling from a pretty rich stack of sources for this. We've got insights from renowned neuroscientists, noetic scientists, some compelling historical accounts, and even details, believe it or not, about secret government projects. So yeah, settle in, get ready to maybe reconsider everything you thought you knew.
Yeah.
Okay, so to really get this groundbreaking theory, we first need to understand what it's up against, the conventional wisdom, right? Let's start with Dr. Brigitte Gessner. She's a brilliant neuroscientist from Prague, and she really represents that prevailing materialist view.
Right. Dr. Gessner's perspective is, well, it's quite clear-cut. She sees your personal attributes, your hopes, your fears, all your dreams, your memories, as basically just chemical compounds. They're held in suspension by electrical charges inside your brain. That's it. So from this viewpoint, when you physically die, these chemicals just dissolve, and poof, your unique identity is erased, gone. She'd argue pretty strongly that concepts like the afterlife are simply, quote, shared delusions. And every single human experience, from, say, profound religious ecstasy to our deepest fears, it's all reducible to just brain chemistry. Complex, sure, but still just chemistry.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like a very, very definitive dismissal of anything beyond the physical brain. Very neat and tidy, almost. But then we introduced Dr. Katherine Solomon. She's an internationally acclaimed noetic scientist, and she takes a completely opposing stance. She actually states that the currently accepted model consciousness created by the brain, located inside the head, is, quote, fundamentally flawed. Now, that's a bold claim.
It certainly is a very bold claim. And it immediately raises a crucial question, doesn't it? What exactly is noetic science? Well, it's formally defined as the study of human consciousness. And Katherine argues quite forcefully that consciousness is not created by your brain, nor, she says, is it contained neatly within your head. Instead, she posits it's a fundamental intrinsic aspect of the universe itself, sort of like space or time or energy. It just is, and it exists everywhere.
Okay, so how do we wrap our heads around that? She uses a really compelling analogy, I found. Instead of your brain generating consciousness like a power plant making electricity, think of it more like a radio receiver. It's not creating the broadcast, right? It's simply tuning into an existing matrix of awareness, this sort of infinite cloud of radio waves that's already out there. Lets us experience what already exists around us.
Yeah. And it's a big if for many, but if her theory is correct, it would indeed bring about a truly profound shift, a fundamental change in our views of humanity, of life itself, and especially of what happens after death. It's been described in some of our sources as potentially the new holy grail of science. I mean, comparing it to paradigm-altering works like Darwin's On the Origin of Species. That's how big some people think this is.
That really is a paradigm-shifting idea.
Yeah.
Huge. But okay, let's play devil's advocate from the conventional scientific viewpoint. What are the immediate, really significant hurdles or criticisms this receiver theory faces? How do people like Dr. Solomon or the sources we're looking at even begin to address questions about proof and observation?
Well, yeah, the biggest challenge, no question, is the lack of direct physical evidence. You can't exactly put universal consciousness in a test tube, right? Or measure how a brain tunes into it with current instruments. Materialists would immediately point to, countless studies showing how brain damage affects consciousness, how drugs alter it. They argue, look, this strongly supports consciousness originating in the brain, cause and effect. Solomon's counter-argument, and this is echoed by other noetic scientists, isn't that brain activity is irrelevant. Not at all. It's that the brain is the interface. Or maybe a filter. Think about it. If your radio is broken, you can't hear the broadcast. But that doesn't mean the radio station stopped transmitting, does it?
Ah, okay, so the signal's still there, the receiver's just damaged.
Exactly. So they're looking for different kinds of evidence. Evidence of consciousness maybe persisting after brain death or accessing information that seems way beyond the brain's known physical capacity. That's the kind of anomaly they focus on.
Right. So if our brain is primarily this receiver, this filter, why aren't we just constantly perceiving this infinite cloud of awareness? Why isn't it just overwhelming noise all the time? This is where, for me, the implications of this model really start to get, well, interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And our sources really dig into the role of a specific chemical, gamma-aminobutyric acid. GABA, it seems to act as a key biological mechanism in the brain. Essentially, it's a filter. See, GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Its job is to decrease neuronal firing, to sort of constrain activity. It effectively prevents our brains from being completely overloaded by what would otherwise be an endless torrent of incoming data from this matrix of awareness.
Huh. Okay, that makes sense. Like noise canceling for the universe.
Yeah.
Think about it this way, right? Newborn babies, apparently, have naturally high GABA levels. And that serves as a protective mechanism, shielding them from just too much stimulation in this brand new, overwhelming world they've just entered. And similarly, many sources suggest that when, say, Tibetan monks achieve that state of empty mind during deep meditation, they're essentially blocking out the external world. This is often associated biologically with a temporary increase in GABA activity. It allows for that really focused internal state.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, look at conditions like epilepsy. They offer a really stark example. Epilepsy is linked to dangerously low GABA levels, which causes what's described as runaway neuronal firing. That's the seizure, the electrical storm in the brain. But here's the paradox.
Yeah.
Immediately after a seizure, the brain often kind of reboots, right? And GABA levels can plummet even further for a short time. Now, during this brief window, the filters are said to just drop wide open. This can lead to what some people describe as a glimpse of unfiltered reality. It's often called postictal bliss, or maybe a state of pure consciousness, almost like opening a temporary gateway to the divine. And it's probably no coincidence that famous figures thought to have had epilepsy, like maybe Vincent van Gogh or Fyodor Dostoevsky, are noted for these almost otherworldly bursts of profound creativity potentially linked to these post-seizure states.
Wow. It really makes you wonder about all those stories, doesn't it? I mean, if these intense physiological events like seizures can offer these glimpses, what about other profound experiences, maybe even more common ones that seem to suggest our consciousness isn't just locked inside our skulls?
Exactly. That leads us right into things like out-of-body experiences, OBEs, and near-death experiences, NDEs. Our sources present these as particularly strong pieces of evidence, at least from the noetic perspective, suggesting consciousness can reside outside the brain and potentially even survive physical death. Think back to Raymond Moody's 1975 bestseller, Life After Life. It documented hundreds of medically verified cases. These were people who were clinically dead, heart stopped, brain activity ceased by conventional measures, yet they reported common elements during their NDEs. Seeing things from a disembodied point of view, often hovering above their own body, moving into a dark tunnel, approaching a bright, welcoming light, and this overwhelming feeling of absolute calm and, interestingly, boundless knowledge.
And Katherine Solomon's research you mentioned actually tried to track this scientifically, not just collect stories.
Yes, exactly. She found that in a dying brain, GABA levels plummeted down to near zero, apparently, which effectively means all the brain's filters were gone.
Wow.
So this isn't just theory for her. Her work suggests that during the process of dying, consciousness is able to perceive, quote, the entire spectrum. It witnesses all of reality. And that leads to those often reported feelings of total connection, oneness, and that all-knowing bliss. Her really powerful conclusion is this. As we die, our bodies shut down and our brains wake up. It flips the whole thing on its head.
That's profound. And what about that common trope, my life flashed before my eyes? Does her research touch on that?
It does, actually. It's quite intriguing. Her experiments also observed a flood of gamma waves sweeping through the brain just before the heart ceased functioning. Now, gamma waves are typically associated with things like intense focus, concentration, and crucially, memory retrieval. So it suggests, perhaps, a final profound integration or review of life experience right at the very end.
Fascinating. So, okay, seizures, dying. These are involuntary extreme states. Are there other ways, other pathways, or maybe substances that seem to temporarily open these channels, lower the filters, give us a wider bandwidth?
Absolutely. And this is where things get controversial again for some. Katherine's research extended into psychedelics. Things like mescaline, LSD, psilocybin. What she found or proposed was that these substances also drastically decrease GABA levels in the brain. Now, this doesn't mean you're simply hallucinating, as conventional wisdom might tell you, just seeing things that aren't there because the drug messed with your brain. Instead, within this noetic framework, it suggests you're actually seeing more of reality. The filters are down. So those profound sensations, connectedness, boundless love, enlightenment, often reported during these experiences. From this perspective, they're described as potentially real insights into the nature of consciousness, not merely drug-induced illusions. And, you can look at Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, or Rick Dobling's work with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They confirm there's serious real-world research happening right now, exploring these substances for their significant therapeutic potential, often linked to these very experiences of interconnectedness.
Right, it's definitely moving out of the fringes. Even our dreams, though, something we all experience every night, they seem to connect to this idea of altered filters, too.
Indeed, they do. A dreaming brain, according to these sources, is described as remarkably similar to a dying brain in one crucial aspect. Those GABA levels plummet, the filtering mechanisms lower considerably. This allows a much wider bandwidth of information, maybe from that universal matrix, to flow into our awareness while we sleep. And this influx of often unfiltered, sometimes raw data helps explain why dreams often feel like these illogical jumbles of images and ideas. It's like the receiver picking up stray signals without the usual filters.
Oh, okay.
And the reason they fade so rapidly when we wake up. The theory suggests that as we wake, the brain reboots, GABA levels increase again, and those filters quickly re-engage, shutting down that wider bandwidth. Poof, the dream evaporates.
That puts a whole new spin on why dreams feel so vivid in the moment, yet so hard to grasp just seconds later. Okay, so if we accept this recontextualization of consciousness, this receiver model, what does it mean for all those phenomena often dismissed as paranormal or just simply unexplainable weirdness?
Well, it basically reframes them completely. It offers a potential mechanism, right? Consider cases of sudden savant syndrome. These are really baffling. We hear stories like Ruben Nesimo, a 16-year-old kid, wakes from a coma suddenly speaking fluent Spanish he never learned. Or Derek Amato suffers a head injury, suddenly becomes a musical genius despite no prior training. From a purely materialist perspective, where does that knowledge or skill come from? It's inexplicable. But Catherine's model suggests the brain injury might have inadvertently retuned the receiver. It's like the brain is suddenly tuning into a different station on that universal consciousness dial, accessing latent information or abilities that were always out there in the field.
And what about something like, say, eidetic memory, that perfect photographic recall like the fictional character Robert Langdon is supposed to have?
Right. Our sources raise a really interesting point about that. They suggest that physically storing the sheer volume of data implied by true eidetic memory, potentially millions of gigabytes, inside the physical structure of the brain is, well, maybe a physical impossibility if the brain has to create and store it all locally.
Like the storage capacity just isn't there.
Exactly. Instead, Catherine proposes the brain isn't necessarily storing everything. Maybe it's primarily accessing data from elsewhere. Much like cloud computing, right? Your computer accesses data stored on remote servers. Maybe memory works similarly, accessing a sort of consciousness cloud.
Okay, cloud computing for memories. That's
Yeah.
a wild thought. This also leads us to consider another really fascinating and often dismissed area, precognition, seeing the future, essentially.
The ability to sense or know future events before they happen. History is, it's full of compelling anecdotes, even if they're hard to prove scientifically after the fact. You've got stories about Carl Jung and his synchronicity experiences, Mark Twain supposedly dreaming of his brother's death in detail, Joan of Arc's clairvoyant dreams, even Abraham Lincoln reportedly dreaming of his own assassination shortly before it happened. And then there's that really eerie one, Morgan Robertson's 1898 novel, Futility. It depicted an unsinkable ocean liner called the Titan, striking an iceberg in the North Atlantic on an April night 14 years before the Titanic disaster, with some disturbingly specific details matching up.
Wow. Coincidence or something more?
Well, and more scientifically, Catherine's own experiments reportedly showed subjects' brains reacting physiologically to an emotionally charged image before a computer had even randomly selected which image to show them, like a pre-echo.
Okay, so how do materialists usually explain away things like that novel, or the brain reacting early? What's the standard dismissal? And why does this noetic science view offer a more, maybe encompassing explanation?
Well, traditionally, yeah, the explanations are usually coincidences, especially with the novel. Millions of books are written. Selective memory, we remember the hits and forget the misses. Confirmation bias. Sometimes outright fraud is suspected. The standard materialist framework just doesn't have a mechanism for information traveling backward in time, or for the brain to somehow independently generate knowledge about a future event that hasn't occurred yet in linear time. It violates known physics as currently understood.
Makes sense. There's no wire for future data.
Exactly. The noetic view, however, with its model of consciousness potentially existing outside of our perceived linear space-time, maybe in some kind of unified field, well, it allows for such phenomena, at least conceptually. If consciousness is part of this infinite interconnected matrix, then perhaps linear time, as we experience it day to day, is just another filter imposed by our brain receiver. So precognition, from this angle, becomes less about seeing the future magically, and maybe more about briefly perceiving information that already exists in this timeless, interconnected awareness before it manifests into our perceived step-by-step linear reality.
So time itself might be part of the filter. Okay? And these, let's call them paranormal phenomena, for lack of a better word, when viewed through this noetic lens, they're further supported by deeper conceptual frameworks you mentioned.
They absolutely are. Take fractals, for instance. You know those mesmerizing swirling designs you see in nature, like snowflakes or coastlines, where the same pattern repeats infinitely at smaller and smaller scales? They suggest, just through their mathematical structure, a profound kind of interconnectedness. It's almost as if there's no individual part, only the whole. We are, in essence, perhaps reflections of one overarching consciousness. And this echoes the views of figures like Albert Einstein or Leonardo da Vinci, who often spoke about unity and the deep interconnectedness of all things, rather than seeing the world as just separate, isolated objects. It's a visual metaphor, almost, for how a tiny part can contain the blueprint of the entire whole.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. And this unified view, it really resonates strikingly with so many ancient spiritual traditions across the globe, doesn't it?
It really does. For millennia, they've spoken of a universal consciousness. Whether it's called the Akashic Field in some Hindu traditions, the universal mind, cosmic consciousness, the kingdom of God in Christianity, the names differ, but the underlying concept of a unified field of awareness is remarkably consistent. And it even connects, interestingly, to someone like Nikola Tesla, the inventor. He famously stated, "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration." He saw his own mind as tapping into something larger.
Okay, so we've journeyed from philosophy and neuroscience through the biology of brain filters, looked at phenomena once deemed paranormal, and now our deep dive takes a pretty sharp turn into the realm of advanced and, frankly, often quite unsettling technology.
Right. So while Katherine Solomon herself theorized about a hypothetical brain chip, something that could maybe regulate those GABA levels precisely, allowing someone to purposefully lower their filters and experience more of reality on demand, she actually believed the necessary technology, these nanoelectric biofilaments, essentially microscopic artificial wires designed to mimic and integrate with neurons and achieving complete physical integration with the brain's existing neural network. She thought that was genuinely impossible with the technology available when she was writing. Just too complex, too invasive.
But here's where our sources reveal something, well, truly startling. A top-secret CIA science research facility located in Prague, codenamed Threshold, has apparently secretly developed this very technology.
Yes. According to these sources, they've not only created artificial neurons using Catherine's exact design, pulled from her 23-year-old postgraduate thesis, believe it or not, but they've also figured out how to weave them into a neural mesh that integrates directly over the surface of the brain.
That's incredible and alarming. How did they achieve the integration? That was the supposedly impossible part.
Well, this is critical. Threshold reportedly achieved neural integration 10 times faster than natural brain development or healing would allow. They used a technique they apparently call forced cooperation. This involves, get this, feeding the exact same complex puzzle delivered via immersive virtual reality to both the subject's organic brain and the implanted artificial neural mesh simultaneously. They're leveraging a core principle of neuroscience called Hebbian, learning the idea that neurons that fire together wire together. By forcing the artificial and natural neurons to work on the same problem at the same time, they wire up much, much faster.
Wow.
And to amplify this whole process, our sources indicate that psychedelic drugs are used. Why? Because they stimulate neuroplasticity. That's the brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself, adapt, and form new connections rapidly. It speeds the whole integration process up dramatically.
Okay. The implications of this human-to-machine interface, this H2M, they seem absolutely profound, far beyond just treating neurological disorders like Parkinson's or epilepsy.
Oh, indeed. Far beyond. Our sources mention its potential for things like direct brain-to-brain communication. Imagine sharing thoughts, maybe even sensations, instantly, without speaking. There's also talk of memory augmentation upgrading your recall, vastly accelerated learning, downloading skills perhaps, the ability to record and even play back dreams. And even full sensory shared experiences. Think of the movie Strange Days, where you could experience another person's entire sensory reality. Imagine putting on a headset and literally being someone else for a while.
That's sci-fi territory becoming potential reality.
Yeah.
And the military applications. Now, you don't have to stretch your imagination too far, do you?
No, sadly you don't. Our sources clearly highlight things like piloting drones directly through thought, no joystick needed, telepathic communication on the battlefield between soldiers, and advanced data analysis performed at speeds simply unthinkable for an unassisted human mind. Crunching intel in real time by just thinking about it.
And it's worth reminding ourselves, this isn't all happening in secret labs. Real-world companies, very high-profile ones like Elon Musk's Neuralink or Synchron, which has backing from figures like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, they're already developing similar, though perhaps currently less invasive, H2M interfaces for medical and potentially consumer use. This field is moving fast.
It is. But threshold, according to these sources, is even more specialized and, well, frankly, more unsettling in its focus. It's described almost as a death lab.
A death lab.
Yeah. A place where subjects are intentionally placed on the very edge of death, presumably through controlled medical means, specifically to study what they see and experience as those brain filters, the GABA levels, drop dramatically. And we should remember, our sources point out, the CIA has a long, documented, if sometimes controversial, history of psychic research. Think back to Project Stargate in the 70s and 80s. That aimed to train psychic spies for remote viewing, the purported ability of human consciousness to detach, hover, and observe distant events or locations.
Right, I remember reading about that. And didn't some former Stargate project managers actually confirm it worked, at least sometimes, citing successes like spying on Soviet submarines or finding lost planes?
They did claim successes, yes. The project was officially shut down, but Threshold, as described in our sources, sounds like a direct evolution of Stargate, the next generation, the ultimate surveillance tool. The idea seems to be to enable trained pilots sitting safely in control cockpits to act as spirit guides, maybe, for psychonauts, individuals whose consciousness is untethered using this tech, possibly near death. It's like flying a fleet of invisible drones, not through airspace, but through this noetic field, this universal consciousness.
So they could potentially record NDEs directly and even guide someone within that experience in real time.
That appears to be the goal described in these sources. Recording, understanding, and maybe even navigating non-ordinary states of consciousness, particularly the near-death state. The implications are staggering.
Absolutely staggering. Okay, so after exploring these really radical ideas, this alternative view of consciousness, and then diving into these cutting-edge, if frankly clandestine and worrying technologies,
Yeah.
what does this profound redefinition of consciousness ultimately mean for you, for me, for our listener? How does it change things on a personal level?
Well, for one thing, it offers a profoundly different, and I think for many, potentially quite comforting perspective on death. Katherine Solomon's model, the noetic model, suggests that consciousness survives physical death. It doesn't just blink out of existence when the brain dies. It simply abandons the physical body, the receiver, and sort of reintegrates back into the whole, back into that universal awareness. Now, if you truly believe that, it could significantly ease the deep-seated trepidation, the fear that many people feel about aging and mortality. It proposes that our essential being, our soul, our mind, would transcend the death of his body and live on.
And this connects directly to a really important psychological theory, doesn't it? Called terror management theory, or TMT.
Yes, exactly. TMT posits that the predominant human fear, maybe the single most powerful motivator underlying almost all human behavior, culture, everything, is, at its core, the fear of death, the fear of annihilation.
And this fear, according to TMT and echoed in our sources, often leads to many of the less pleasant, more selfish and divisive behaviors we see in the world. Things like increased nationalism, racism, religious intolerance, obsessive materialism, even environmental neglect, clinging to symbols of permanence or group identity to ward off the terror of individual mortality.
Conversely, the theory suggests, and some studies support this, that individuals who genuinely do not fear death, perhaps due to spiritual beliefs, profound personal experiences like NDEs, or maybe even philosophical conviction, tend to exhibit more benevolent qualities, more acceptance, more cooperation, more caring behavior towards others and the planet. There's a quote from the psychiatrist Stanislav Grof, who did a lot of work with non-ordinary states. He's quoted in our sources saying, "The elimination of the fear of death transforms the individual's way of being in the world. It changes everything."
So could this fundamental shift in understanding consciousness, if it were widely accepted, actually be the key to unlocking a more unified, maybe more benevolent future for humanity, reducing that underlying fear?
Katherine Solomon certainly seems to believe so, based on our sources. She sees this current technological explosion, this pushing of boundaries, coupled with these potentially paradigm-shifting insights into consciousness as part of a much larger spiritual evolution. She envisions it leading toward a future where humanity becomes potentially a truly unified species. A future where consciousness might become less tethered to the limitations of the purely physical world, yet paradoxically more deeply connected to all things through this underlying field. It's a grand vision where, ultimately, death is not the end.
Wow. We definitely started this deep dive with a pretty mind-bending question, didn't we? About the true nature of consciousness. We've explored how the standard materialist view sees it all as just brain chemistry, fizzing away inside our skulls, while the noetic perspective flips that, framing the brain as a sophisticated receiver, tuning into a vast universal consciousness that permeates everything. We've seen how experiences ranging from psychedelic journeys and epileptic seizures to sudden savant syndrome and maybe even ancient prophecies could, possibly, be interpreted as glimpses of a reality far richer and more interconnected than our everyday filters normally allow us to perceive. And yet we've touched upon these incredible and sometimes quite unsettling technologies being developed, apparently in secret, in the pursuit of understanding and maybe even harnessing this fundamental aspect of existence.
Yeah, what truly stands out to me after looking through all this is the profound shift it implies for just our basic understanding of ourselves, and especially our perception. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really suggests that our normal human perception is just riddled with blind spots, filters everywhere. And that implies that critical thinking, constantly questioning our own assumptions, genuinely considering different viewpoints, even uncomfortable ones, is maybe more essential now than ever. It's really about recognizing that what we perceive as objective reality might just be a very, very small slice of a much larger pie. A sliver, really.
Which raises a really important question for you, our listener, to ponder after this. If our consciousness is indeed everywhere, as this theory suggests, a fundamental building block of the universe itself, and our brains are merely sophisticated receivers tuning into it, how might truly internalizing that idea change the way you perceive your everyday experiences, your connections or lack thereof to other people, and even your own deeply held sense of self, your identity? What does you even mean then?
It's deep stuff. And our sources conclude with a really fascinating kind of poetic reinterpretation of a very familiar symbol, the Statue of Liberty's radiant crown. We often see those rays as enlightenment flowing out from America to the world, but through this noetic lens, you could reinterpret it completely differently. Maybe it represents consciousness flowing in, streams of different cultures, languages, ideas, experiences, pouring into the melting pot of America, which was itself created perhaps as a kind of societal receiver designed to bring disparate souls together toward a shared, unified experience. It suggests a grander, unifying purpose behind it all.
Yeah, it's a powerful image to end on. This deep dive has definitely explored the audacious, controversial claim that something real, something profound, lies beyond our immediate physical experience, and perhaps even beyond its eventual end. Perhaps, like that iconic statue, maybe we too are designed, fundamentally, to be receivers, capable, if we just attuning, of connecting with something far, far greater than our individual selves. The question is, what will you choose to tune into next?